right, so there is an Indians game today. Did you know that? 1 o'clock. They're on a hot streak. They play the Twins. They lost last night, but they're still doing pretty good. So if you wanted to go up to the game and enjoy America's favorite pastime, you could jump on StubHub, get some tickets. If you hit the button that said priced low to high, like most normal humans do, the first things that would come up would be $20 tickets. You could spend $20, which is pretty cheap, right? Like you'd spend more buying a Coke and a hot dog than your ticket on the game. Now, you would be pretty close to the top of the stadium, the ones I were looking at where they were like right behind home plate. You probably barely see the people on the field. But you'd be at a Major League Baseball game for $20. Hard to complain about that. Now, if you went crazy and you hit the other button, you know, the button that says price high to low, which you never ever hit in your life, but if you would find tickets on there for $250, and that would get you 6 rows from the third baseline. Pretty sweet seats. Right there, right down in the action. So you spend $20, you gotta be up in the nosebleed section. You spend $250, you're right down in the action. Does that upset you? Like, are you like, oh, I can't believe that somebody who would pay $250 gets to sit right down there and somebody who spends $20 has to sit way up there? Is that upsetting to you? Probably not, right? Like, you might wish that you could spend $20 and sit right down on the third baseline, but you're not upset about the concept of paying more and getting a better seat at a baseball game. Let me ask you this. What if a church did the same kind of thing? What if, you're not like, I don't know, like what if we did? I don't know what best seats would be because clearly it's not the front row, you're not that attracted to it. Maybe it'd be an aisle seat or the back, like I don't know how we would decide what the best seats are. But what if a church said, you know what, you pay more, you get a better seat. If you pay less, you get a crappier seat. What if a church did the same thing? Does that upset you? It does, right? Like that actually sits wrong. A baseball game, that's one thing, but for a church to do it, that's just weird, right? That doesn't sound right. So here's the crazy part. So we're going through the book of James, right? And some of the churches that James wrote his letter to are doing this exact kind of thing. So in James chapter 2, starting in verse 2, look at what he says. He says, hey, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but if you say to the poor one, you can stand over there or else sit on the floor, well, doesn't this discrimination show that your judgments are guided by evil motives? So in some of the churches that James is writing to, the rich folk get nice seats and the poor people, they don't even get seats. Like you go stand in the back or you have to sit on the floor. And James is saying, hey, that's wrong. Like you shouldn't do that. Which we kind of knew that already, right? Like I think we know that churches shouldn't do this. But here's my question. Like, why? Why are we cool with a 6th row seat costing more than a 106th row seat at a baseball game, but not in church? Why are we totally cool with an Indians game doing that, but if we did it here, that would be horrible? I'm not asking because I think we should start this, just so you know. I'm asking because I want it to be more than a gut level instinct on our part of why this would be wrong. I'm asking because I think we need to know why. I want to have a deep understanding of why something like that would be wrong. And by the way, I think the application's bigger than don't treat rich people nice just because they're rich and don't treat poor people bad just because they're poor. Like that is an application of what James says here. But just to be honest, like I don't know that you need that. Do I need to preach a whole sermon on, hey, don't treat rich people nice just because they're rich? Do I need to preach that? Do you need that? I'm hoping, generally, you've got that down already. You understand the concept that that's probably not what you should do. But I think it's a little bigger than that. So look at verse 1. We skip verse 1. Look at verse 1. Look at what James says here. My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? So what James is kind of opening this up here to any kind of favoritism. And not just favoritism. Obviously, he's including by implication favoritism's opposite, discrimination. Right? Don't treat someone better or worse because of a snap judgment or a first impression or a prejudice or just an assumption that you made about them based on the group you think they're from. Don't do that. You shouldn't treat a rich person better than a poor person. You shouldn't treat a rich person really different than a poor person. You shouldn't treat a black person different than a white person. You shouldn't treat a person who wears a polo shirt different from a person who wears a turban. You shouldn't treat a person covered in tattoos different than a person wearing a suit. James says, do not decide how you're going to treat someone based on their outward appearance. Don't do that. Don't decide how you're going to treat someone based on an assumption you're making about them. So the definition of discrimination, if we look at the negative side of this for a minute, is the unjust or prejudicial treatment of different categories of people. And I'm aware that like we all experience discrimination at some point in our lives, like you experienced it, right? In your life, you felt the way that hurts and you felt how that comes off. And you're probably very aware of that when it happens to you. But can we make a deal today? Can we acknowledge that it is easier to think about being discriminated against than it is to think about maybe us being the ones who are doing the discriminating? It's easier, right? It's easier to think about when I'm treated poorly because I'm in some group or some assumption someone's made about me than it is to really reflect on the idea that we might be doing that to someone else. So I'd love it if we could think about this subject not from the perspective of being discriminated against, but from the perspective of what we need to work on when it comes to our discrimination of others. And just so you know, just a little test. If you're sitting here going, I don't discriminate at all, want to bet? I would bet that if you are unaware of any amount of discrimination, there's more there than you realize, because I think we all tend to do this from time to time, to treat people according to the categories we put them in rather than to who they really are. Now, so James says, don't do this, right? Essentially, don't do this. But he uses stronger language than just don't do this, right? He's actually saying here, how can you claim to have faith in Jesus and play favorites, right? How can you hold on to your faith and favoritism at the same time? How can you hold on to Christianity and discrimination? James says they're incompatible. You can't hold on to both of those. You're going to have to let go of one to hold on to the other. It would kind of be like saying, hey, I want to be a part of the civil rights movement and the KKK. Like, they don't really go together. That's oil and water. They're at their core, they are opposites. And James is saying at the heart of Christianity and the heart of discrimination are opposites. They do not go together. You can't have both. You got to kind of pick one. So he says, how can you claim to have faith if you're playing favorites? How can you claim to have faith if you are discriminating? And just to let you know how serious he is about this subject, you bounce down to verse 8, and here's what he says. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. But if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. For the person who keeps all of the laws except one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. For the same God who said you must not commit adultery also said you must not murder. So if you murder someone, but do not commit adultery, you've still broken the law. I got to be honest, when I first read this section of scripture, this isn't like my favorite part of the book of James, just so I'm not like, ooh, this is so good, like I can apply this directly to my life. This isn't one of those. And then when I read this, it was kind of shocking. I'm a little surprised at how serious James is taking this, right? Like, we're talking about playing favorites and discrimination, and all of a sudden, murder. It's like, whoa, James, what happened there? Like, how did you go from discrimination to murder? Like, that's a crazy big jump to bring up murder in the same breath as discrimination. Like, how did we get there? Well, here's what I think is going on here. I think James is anticipating us kind of shrugging our shoulders at this subject. Us kind of saying, like, listen, discrimination, you know, what? Everybody does it a little bit. Like, it's not that big of a deal. And James is kind of wanting to push us in the chest a little bit and be like, hey, hold up now. This is a big deal. This is a big deal. Breaking God's commandments is breaking God's commandment. Like, don't act like this is some small thing. God says not to do it. You should take it pretty serious. So he's trying to kind of wake us up here a little bit, saying, don't shrug this off. Now, a little side note here, off the subject of discrimination for a second, just on these couple of verses here. Some people look at these verses and they think that these verses are saying that all sin is the same. Right? Have you ever heard anybody say that? All sin's the same. But listen, I want to kind of correct that just a little bit. All sin is the same. That sentence is a little misleading because it's incomplete. I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying it's incomplete. All sin is the same in that all sin separates us from God. From the biggest to the smallest sin, any sin will separate you from a holy and perfect God. But like, if you just use common sense, some sin is worse than others. It's the same in that it separates us from God, but man, like it confuses me when people just say all sin is the same, because it is clearly not. Like if I'm driving down the road and somebody cuts me off and I flick them off, it's different than if I pulled out a gun and shot them, right? Like just for you to say, oh, it's the same. Like it's very different for him. I promise, like he had a different experience in that. It's gonna be different for me as well, right? Like I'm going to experience different repercussions, different consequences in my life based on which one I did. And I even would say I'm gonna experience different spiritual consequences for one over the other. So all sin is the same, yes, in that it separates us from God, but it's not the same just in life and in consequences, both physical and spiritual. So I just wanted to kind of clear that up. But what James is saying here is, hey, breaking God's law is breaking God's law. It is a big deal all by itself. Don't separate it out and say, it's just not that big of a deal. It's a really big deal. So I want to dig into this. I want to ask the question, why is it so important that we as Christians don't discriminate, don't play favorites based on outward appearance or assumptions or groups that we think people are a part of? Besides God said so, which is enough, I want to have a deeper understanding. Why is this a big deal? So I'm going to give you 4 reasons. First reason, we don't discriminate or play favorites is found in Genesis chapter 1. We're going to go all the way back to the very beginning. So here's what Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27 say. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, and the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them. So these verses right here tell us that when God created humans, he did something special, right? He did something different from everything else in creation. He created human beings in his own image and likeness. Theologians use the term the imago Dei, the image of God. Every single human being that you ever run into in your life in some way bears the imago Dei, the image of God. That means that they have inherent value because they carry the image of God, different from the rest of creation. A human life is worth more than the life of any other created thing because of this image of God that we bear. And listen, I'm not anti-animal. I grew up in a home where animals outnumbered humans like 3-1, 4-1 at some times. Like we had animals everywhere. So I'm not anti-animal, but I do believe that the Bible teaches that humans are the crown jewel of creation, that there is something inherent about us because we bear God's likeness that sets us apart. So if, let's say hypothetically, the zombie apocalypse happens, and I know you're all prepared for this, you have plans. Let's say me and my wife and my 3 kids, Trinity, Gideon, and Zeke, and our dog are hiding in our basement trying to survive, okay? And we're starting to run out of food. We're not gonna draw straws to decide who gets to eat and have Roxy be a part of that, our little dog. Like, sorry, Trinity, you don't get to eat tonight. Roxy got the longer straw. She gets to eat instead of you. Like, that's not gonna happen, right? We know that we're gonna take care of the humans before we take care of the dogs. And you thought in that story, I was gonna say we were gonna eat the dog. You guys are sick. The only reason we wouldn't is because she's so little, there wouldn't be much to eat. That's really it. But I think we inherently get this, right? human beings bear the image of God. So just on top of this, so right off the bat, God says, hey, there's something special about human beings. If you bump over to Genesis chapter 9, when God's giving out like the severe consequences for murdering another human being, the reason he says it's such a serious thing to murder somebody is because they bear his image. Like that's his reasoning. He says, hey, this is what happens if you murder somebody because that person bears my image. It's as if he takes an assault on his image personally. Like he takes it personal when somebody assaults his image. And then kind of the flip side of that, Jesus, when telling a story about people who fed the poor or gave to the poor and fed the hungry, he says this in Matthew 25:40. He says, and the king will say, I tell you the truth, when you did it to one of the least of my brothers and sisters, you were doing it for me. So again, it seems that God takes it personal what we do to image bearers. So why it is important that we do not discriminate, do not show favoritism, because every single person you interact with in your life bears the imago Dei, the image of God. Every single one. Rich, poor, white, black, brown, disabled, unborn, elderly. Every one of them bears the image of Creator God. And an assault on the image of the king, I guess, is the same as an assault on the king himself. He takes it that serious. So we should not take that lightly. That's the first reason why we should not discriminate. We should not treat people different based on the groups that we have them in our heads. Second reason we don't discriminate, James actually mentioned in verse 8. We read it already, but here's what he said. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. So love your neighbor as yourself. This is, Jesus said, this is the second most important commandment. He said, love God, that's number one. Love your neighbor, that's number two. Like Jesus listed it as number two, the most important commandment. Love your neighbor as yourself. And then a slight variation on the royal law, James calls it the royal law, is something we call the golden rule, right? Jesus said this, do unto others as you would like them to do to you. Treat people the way you want to be treated. So let's take this idea and apply it to first impressions in your life. Would you want someone to size you up before getting to know you? Would you want that? Would you want someone to treat you poorly based on assumption they made about you because they put you in some kind of category in their head? Would you want someone to assume the worst about you? Would you want someone to treat you according to a label they gave you without ever bothering to find out if you deserve the label? I'm going to assume no. I'm going to assume when you enter new social situations, those aren't things you're hoping for. Man, I hope these people think the worst of me. I hope they really hate me before they even get to know me. That's really what I want. I think the answer is flat no, which means if you're going to follow this, if you don't want them to do it to you, you should probably not do it to them. That's why I love this, man. This is the genius of Jesus. If you ask the question, am I loving my neighbor? Jesus will answer, well, are you treating them the way you want to be treated? That's a great little test, a great little barometer to see, man, am I loving my neighbor? Well, am I treating them the way I would want to be treated? It's an awesome little way to tell. So this is our second reason why Christians are not going to discriminate. We're not going to play favorites. We're not going to treat people based on the labels that we put on them because we don't want it to be done to us. The golden rule, the royal law. So first reason is that every human being on the planet bears the imago Dei, the image of God. The second reason is the royal law, the golden rule. The third reason, I'm just going to let C.S. Lewis tell it to you because he always says it better than me. Here's what he says. There are no ordinary people. You have never talked to a mere mortal. Nations, cultures, arts, civilization, these are mortal. And their life is to ours as the life of a gnat. But it is immortals whom we joke with, work with, marry, snub, and exploit. Immortal horrors or everlasting splendors. So what C.S. Lewis is saying is, hey, every single person you ever meet, they're going to spend eternity somewhere. They're going to spend eternity somewhere. The human soul is immortal. It will outlast every nation, culture, civilization. You realize in a couple of weeks, the United States turns 241, I think. And that seems like a long time. But that's a blink of an eye compared to the longevity of every soul that exists. Doesn't just that, the idea that the soul's going to live forever, doesn't that give intrinsic value to every person you ever meet? That their soul will outlast the span of the universe? Like our brains can't even wrap around how long that is, but the soul's going to last forever. Every single person you meet will spend eternity somewhere. So does that idea influence the way you interact with people? That you're interacting with immortals in that their souls will never die. Did you know Gandhi? You know who Gandhi is, right? Famous Hindu leader, civil rights guy. Early in his life, he almost became a Christian. I just read this week. He almost became a Christian. He was a student, learning a lot, and he was reading the Gospels, and he was drawn to Christianity. So he decided one day he's going to go to a church, and he's going to meet the pastor and kind of talk to him, and he was considering, like, maybe I should pursue Christianity. So he goes to this church, and an usher catches him at the front door. And the first thing the guy says to him is, "Hey man, why don't you go worship with your own people?" Caught him at the door. And I guess they had like a little brief interaction, and it got to the point where the usher threatened to have him thrown down the front steps of the church if he wouldn't leave. And after that, Gandhi said, well, if this is Christianity, I guess I'll stay a Hindu. Which led to a rather famous quote that you've probably heard before. Gandhi said this, "I like your Christ. I do not like your Christians. Your Christians are so unlike your Christ." See that? I don't ever want to be the cause of somebody thinking like this. Oh, man. And I know we don't struggle with this as a church. You know, you're like, well, we're not going to throw anybody down the stairs here. There aren't stairs, so they probably wouldn't be able to throw them down. Like, I know that. We don't struggle with this kind of active discrimination, right? We're not that aggressive about it. We at least know enough to keep it a little bit hidden. So maybe what we struggle with more is more of a passive discrimination. Maybe we're more passively unloving to certain kinds of people. So we were tearing down Blue Tip Kingdom here on Wednesday, and we were trying to get cleaned up, trying to get out of there. And there was some Blue Tip crew there cleaning up some trash and stuff too. And these guys, the Blue Tip crew guys, are there working off community service hours. They're trying to get that done. So we were interacting, we were joking with them. It was actually, I believe the joke was that I had to prepare this sermon the following day on Thursday, that's sermon prep day. And we were kind of saying, like, I can't help clean up tomorrow because I got to do this. And one of the guys, is like, one of the Blue Tip crew guys who's working off community service hours, actually volunteered to preach the sermon for me. He was going to prepare it. It was a good laugh. So we all kind of had a good laugh about that. And then we kind of went back to work. And then as like the next couple of minutes passed, I kind of felt this nudge from God. And man, when God does stuff like this, it's as if, I know God's always here, but man, sometimes when he gets close, it's actually kind of, it's more scary than anything else, because I kind of felt him nudge me and go, really? You're gonna let that interaction stay that shallow? Really? Like, he knows you're a pastor, he knows you guys are a church, he knows all that stuff. You're preaching this sermon on Sunday, and you're just gonna let him walk away and not say anything else really? And I'm kind of like, okay. So I went over, and I went up to the guy, and I handed him a Mosaic card, and I said, hey man, like, you should come to our church. And he did one of these, like it was on fire. And I said, I know, church isn't for you. I said, but guess what, man? One of the things we say all the time at Mosaic is we're a church for people who don't think church is for them. So like, I just want to invite you. And he goes, well, I'm an atheist. I said, no, you're not. Which is risky. I said, nobody's really an atheist. And he actually laughed, which was good. I thought I had a little bit of a read on him. And he goes, nah. Church is just full of hypocrites. I don't want to be around them. Sound familiar? Isn't that crazy? Like the connection between, this guy's a world leader, famous Hindu teacher, dude working off community service hours, same observation. So with that in mind, I didn't try to deny it. I said, yeah, man, we are. We are a big, giant group of hypocrites, and we would love to have one more. So if you would come. And that was it. Like I wish I could tell you like, oh, he broke down and cried and accepted Jesus. And he's sitting right here. I wish I could tell you that. He's not, I don't think. But here's the thing. In those moments for me, it's so important when God nudges me on stuff like that. It's more about obedience than it is the outcome. Does that make sense? Because I know if you're like me, I get caught up in those kind of moments like, oh man, I got to say the right thing. I got to come in at the right angle. And what if I do something that kind of pushes them? Like I can get all caught up in all these different things. And at that point, I have to really push all that aside. And if God says, go, I just got to do it. Because I have no idea what happens in that guy's heart, what happens in the future, right? I mean, it didn't turn out the way I wanted it to in that he's not sitting here today. But I don't know what that did in his heart, right? I don't know what seeds that little tiny conversation could. I have no idea. I just know that I needed to say yes to that because God wanted me to do it. And the other reason is, man, I need trained to think about people in terms of the idea that every single person I interact with is going to spend eternity somewhere. Like, am I carrying the weight of that in my interaction with people, or did I just kind of let it stay shallow when I had the opportunity to take it deeper? And that's what God really got after me. Like, what are you doing here? If you're not going to go talk to him, what are you doing any of this for? And it really hit me like this is the whole point. So like I have to try and train myself to think about people in terms of they're eternal. They're going to spend eternity somewhere. If I have an opportunity to steer a conversation towards that, I need to take it every time. Otherwise, I'm not giving them the weight that they deserve. I'm not. So that would be the third reason why we don't discriminate. We don't play favorites. We don't treat people according to labels that we have in our head. Because they're eternal. They're going to spend eternity somewhere. So, Imago Dei, the royal law, the golden rule, eternity. The fourth reason, James says this in verse 12. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you. That is terrifying. Right? Those are scary verses, specifically verse 13 there. Sometimes it's tempting to ignore scary verses and kind of skip over them, but I think when verses are scary like this, we actually need to look closer, not ignore them. It sounds like he's saying that God extending mercy to you is contingent upon you extending mercy to others, doesn't it? Like if you don't give mercy to others, God's not going to give mercy to you. Like you got to do this or God's not going to do this. There's another place in the Bible that's similar to this when Jesus talks about forgiveness, right? We've talked about this before. Jesus says if you don't forgive others, God's not going to forgive you. And it sounds like if you don't forgive others, God's not going to forgive you. Like it's contingent upon you doing something. But we know that the Bible repeatedly and emphatically says that your salvation is not based on what you do, but what Jesus did, right? The Bible repeatedly says it's not by works, it's by faith. It's by your belief and trust in Jesus and what he did on the cross. That's what your salvation is based upon. It's not based on works, which would include forgiving or showing mercy. That would be a work. So verses like this, while they're terrifying, I think what the deeper meaning here is, and he's using some really strong language to say, hey, mercy that flows to you is going to flow through you. It's going to. It's an observation that if you understand that God did not give you what you deserved, you have right now currently better than what you deserve, and in eternity you will get better than what you deserve as a Christian. If you get that, if you get that Jesus died on the cross for you and that you receive massive amounts of mercy because of that, you're not going to turn around after receiving that mercy and not extend it to others. You're not going to. You can't. If you really understand the receiving, you're not going to refuse to give. You can't. You can't earn forgiveness. You can't earn mercy. But you're not going to refuse it to people if you really understand it yourself, if you've really received it yourself. Mercy flows through you. Merciless people have not tasted God's mercy. They haven't. There's just no way. If you've tasted God's mercy, you're going to extend it. So just like we say forgiven people forgive, it's an observation, we'll say people who have been shown mercy show mercy. You do. You're going to. And that would be a big reason why we're not going to discriminate as Christians. We're called to treat people better than they deserve. Even if you're right about your assumption about somebody, you're still going to treat them better than they deserve. You're going to extend the mercy that has been extended to you, to others. So here's what I want to just ask some questions to you. Like, do you see the value of every person you run into in your life? Do you feel the weight of their eternity? Even people who are different than you? What part of your mindset needs to change with how you view people, how you treat people, how you interact with people? Like, what needs to change so that you're giving them the proper respect and honor of a person who bears the image of God, of a person who will spend eternity somewhere? Like, are you treating them in such a way that you get that? And if not, man, how do you need to change? How can you better extend the mercy that's been extended to you, to the people you interact with in your life? Man, what would it look like if we as a church got a hold of this? You know, I don't know if you know this, it's almost a joke between me and JP. Every church, and really every town says they're the friendliest church in town. Do you know that? Like, every church claims that. It's like on every website you could possibly find. All are welcome. And I feel like if you put that on your sign, it probably isn't true. I don't know why, I just have that assumption. Every time I see all are welcome, I'm like, bet they aren't. If you have to tell me, I feel like that's probably not true. But what if we really got this? Like, what if, like, in our lives, we went out and we treated people with that weight? Not that we have to be, like, serious all the time, but, like, if we took everyone serious because we knew, man, there's like an eternal being here. This person bears the image of God. It might be broken, it might be clouded, but it's there. What if we treated people like that? And then what if that happened here? Because this is where James is talking about, like, this is happening in church. So every Sunday morning, can we just be honest? Like, if we can't pull this off for 1 hour a week, like, we need to just pack it in here. We're talking about 1 hour out of a week, treating people with respect no matter who comes in here. Because we understand every single person that comes in here stands at the edge of eternity that could go one way or another. Man, if we could get that, I wonder what God could do with it.